All right, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all back to day 2 of our Digital Scholarship Colloquium. We had a great day at the end of the day yesterday, and so I'm looking forward to our presentations this morning. And to get started, our first presentation is by Lisa Spiro, who is an independent scholar and consultant on digital humanities and digital pedagogy, and the former director of Nightly Labs, and the program manager of Anvil Academic. Former. Excellent. Lisa, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Roger, for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and to Cheryl for all your great work coordinating things. So yesterday, Brian asked the question, what's in it for me in regards to collaboration and digital scholarship? And I want to kind of reframe the question and ask, what's the significance of collaboration in digital scholarship? What difference does it make? And I'll start by reflecting a bit on my own experience as a sort of emerging scholar who discovered the joys of collaboration. So I started graduate school at the University of Virginia in the early 1990s in a program focused on literature. And I spent an awful lot of time in a cell. Sometimes it felt like a monk cell, a place of contemplation, but other times it felt like a prison cell. And I felt like I was kind of staring at the wall like Bartleby the Scrivener of my own isolation and dim prospects for a future. But that changed when I was smart enough to participate in 2 activities. First of all, I joined DIS Group, AKA the dissertation group. And actually, Amanda French, who spoke yesterday, it was a fellow member of the DIS Group. So we have this bond. We would gather together, 6 women, over spinach and garlic pizza, which Amanda talks about as the green and gold of DIS Group. And we would explore each other's work. So we would offer constructive feedback. We would also kind of share our experiences as people trying to make it as scholars. And how do you write a dissertation anyway? And we provided vital support to each other. So this experience convinced me of the real value of a form of collaboration, of building a community of scholars. And I think this is a kind of collaboration that happens frequently in the humanities. Which, as humanists form reading groups and comment on each other's works. But I think there's another form of collaboration which is less common. And this is a kind of collaboration I did as a graduate assistant at the University of Virginia's Electronic Text Center. And this was a pioneering place where a group, primarily of graduate students working in the library, produced electronic texts that were shared online. And in the process, we learned valuable skills about how to encode text using the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI. We learned about how to kind of make projects work, and we learned how to work together. So if I was struggling over how to decipher a manuscript, I could turn to my friend Carolyn and say, what's this word? Or if I was trying to figure out how to encode a kind of complex structure in a text, I could turn to my colleagues and we would figure things out together. We also had a sense that our work was contributing to the public. So the director would read out these enthusiastic emails he got, thank you for making this work available. And there's that real satisfaction of contributing in some sense to the public good. We were also entrusted to do real work. So my colleague Carolyn and I helped come up with guidelines, for example, for working with manuscript materials. So this experience demonstrated to me that collaborative work can be educational. You can learn a lot from the process, that you can contribute to the public, and that you can have fun in the process. And I think it's important to emphasize fun as part of collaboration. And in reflecting on my own career, it's become clear to me that collaboration has had a vital role in the work I've done in the digital humanities, whether that be in developing a wiki that contains information about different research tools, or in helping to build a range of digital collections, or in helping to facilitate collaborations among projects and digital humanists as part of DH Commons. I've also been very interested in kind of exploring the significance of collaboration in digital humanities. So I've written a couple of blog posts kind of synthesizing trends in the digital humanities, especially with the focus on collaboration. And I contributed a chapter to a book on collaboration in digital humanities. So I'll be drawing from that research a lot in today's presentation. So this is kind of a common notion, but it bears repeating that collaboration is common in most disciplines. So a study of co-authorship using the ISI database found that about 80% of all papers in science and engineering are written by 2 or more authors. In the social sciences, over half of all publications are co-authored, but in the humanities, fewer than 10% of publications are co-authored, which is an indicator of a lack of collaboration as we typically conceive of it. So why is collaboration less common in the humanities? So here's the audience participation part. What reasons would you give? Shout them out.
Other people aren't as smart as me.
Okay. I would put that as the myth of the kind of solo genius. But yeah, other people aren't as smart as me.
All I have to do is read this book and read it over and over and over and over and over again, and I can do it all by myself.
So I'm just working with text. I can figure things out.
Counts for less at tenure time to co-author.
You wouldn't know where to go to begin collaborating?
Okay, yeah.
Find someone.
How do I collaborate? It's not part of my training. So you guys, basically came up with the reasons that I would point to as well. Another one being that collaboration is sort of more part of the research methodology of more quantitatively oriented fields. So, a humanist may wonder, well, how do I collaborate in interpreting a poem? Although we do that in classes all the time. We have conversations around cultural works. Also, humanists work with existing data sources. So yesterday, Fran Berman talked about how creation is an important part of the research process, as scientists do experiments or use sensors, and social scientists conduct surveys, whereas humanists typically look at existing cultural sources, archival sources, images, books, and so forth. And then, of course, as Brian pointed out, the myth of the lone genius, and as we also heard, the tenure and promotion process in the humanities typically doesn't recognize collaborative work. So the researcher Blaise Cronin did a study of departmental policies in tenure and promotion in English departments and found that most policies didn't even really recognize collaboration as a mode. They had no way of sort of accounting for that kind of work. Now, it's worth noting that there has been a push for increased collaboration in the humanities. And my favorite example of this happened at the 2000 Modern Language Association conference. There, the president, Linda Hutchian, took as sort of her agenda challenging the so-called adversarial academy and promoting conversation instead of kind of harsh criticism and collaboration over competition. And as a sort of embodiment of this principle, she invited the 2 women who she ran against for the presidency to join her in making a common presentation, arguing for collaboration, suggesting that greater creativity can result from collaboration, that we can have a more integrated approach to doing humanities research. So this talk concluded with the 3 of them reading a poem together and kind of conducting a collaborative dance, if you will. So there is a recognition, I think, particularly in fields like rhetoric and composition and feminist studies, of the importance of collaboration. But I would also point, of course, to the digital humanities as another area in the humanities that really embraces collaboration. So I did a study a few years ago, a small study, comparing rates of co-authorship in a significant journal in digital humanities, literary and linguistic computing, to a kind of typical journal in American literature, literary history. And I found that nearly half of the articles in LLC had been written by more than one author, as opposed to about 2% in the more traditional humanities journal. And there was actually a fairly significant rate of international collaboration as well. So about 16% of the articles in LLC involved writers from 2 or more countries. So what I want to do today is sort of probe that pattern and try to understand why people are collaborating and how people are collaborating in the digital humanities. And I think collaboration is an important part of the way the field thinks of itself. Jeffrey Rockwell did a study looking at the use of the word collaboration in the humanist list. So this is an important online discussion group in digital humanities. And he noted a sort of upward trend in the use of collaboration. As part of the Day of Digital Humanities, which actually took place yesterday, the digital humanists are invited to provide their own definitions of digital humanities. So in 2012, I noted a number of definitions that include the word collaboration. So people talking about how digital humanities is about sharing, it's about building together, it's about practice and praxis, it's about sort of connecting different disciplines. So again, collaboration is important to the sort of self-identity of the digital humanities. And you also see that reflected in these manifestos about the power of the digital humanities. So the Digital Humanities Manifesto 2.0 talks about digital humanities being about co-creation and about bringing different areas of knowledge together. So all this leads to a question. Does digital humanities have to be collaborative? And I use this quote just as an excuse to have a cute kitten photograph. But Ted Underwood, raises a good point that, arguing against collaboration is like arguing against kittens. There's no upside to it. But then he argues against collaboration. He and Ben Schmidt raised some important points about the need to have an expansive definition of digital humanities that includes solitary as well as collaborative work. And they point out that it's increasingly possible to do solo scholarship in digital humanities, making use of existing data sources as well as tools. And this is especially true for technically savvy people like, Ben and Ted. They also point out that the sort of evangelical fervor around collaboration can very well turn off more traditionally oriented humanists who may not want to work with someone else on their projects. And they worry that funding might be more directed toward these large-scale projects when smaller-scale projects can also make an important contribution. So I would agree that we need to embrace solitary as well as collaborative scholarship. I think one reason for the sort of evangelical fervor around collaboration is to make room for this as a mode, because it has been under-recognized in the past. So I think we need to bring the collaborative mode to the humanities as well. So here are the core questions I want to explore in the rest of the presentation. To really kind of dig in more to the reasons why collaboration is common in digital humanities, and to provide some specific examples of how this collaboration works, and also to acknowledge, building on Brian's talk yesterday, some of the challenges that we face in collaborating. So why is collaboration common in the digital humanities? Again, audience participation. What reasons would you all point to?
I'm not smart enough to do it all.
Okay, the opposite. I'm not smart enough to do it all.
It requires quite a number of skills that go beyond reading and interpreting. You there's computing, there's visualization, there's relational databases, there's indexing. There are lots of computer technical things, as well as other sorts of skills that are required to do it.
Exactly. So you need to have a range of skills, from the sort of disciplinary knowledge to technical skills to project management skills and so forth. What else?
It's more clearly novel so that it looks better at tenure time.
Huh, okay. So you can be more innovative and distinguish yourself more, potentially? So I would echo all of the reasons that have been given. Lynn Siemens has done some interesting work interviewing and surveying digital humanists about why they collaborate, and points to these reasons. That digital humanities projects, as Eric was suggesting, require a range of skills, that you can be more productive working together than alone, that you need to have these multiple methods kind of joining together in order to produce this really kind of innovative work. And that, you know, in order to get the stuff done, you need to have lots of people contributing. And there's also the notion that digital humanities work tends to be on a larger scale than more traditional work. You're dealing with more data, so therefore you need more people to help out with that process. And again, to invoke fun. People like collaborating. You may run into frustrations when people don't do what you want them to do or don't listen, but there can be real pleasure in collaborating as well. And I would add a couple other reasons. One became obvious to me in talking with Matt Jockers, who's an important researcher in digital humanities, who said, you can ask new kinds of questions when you bring in the skills and perspective of someone else. So he's worked closely, for example, with a statistician, which has enabled him to do new kinds of work. And then I would also say that sharing and collaboration are part of the culture of the digital humanities, and that's reflected by those definitions that were given as part of the Day of Digital Humanities. So a few years ago, I wrote a blog post identifying a lot of different kinds of approaches to collaboration in the digital humanities, from participating in scholarly networks like Haystack, to writing together, to social bookmarking and collaborative annotation. In the interest of time, I want to focus on three primary approaches. One is building collections and resources. Another is interdisciplinary collaboration around devising new methods. And finally, I want to talk about the participatory humanities, and bringing in some thinking about crowdsourcing, for example. Okay, and this is the pause as I try to, as a Mac person tries to work with the PC. So, come on. We'll just do it this way. So, I am a technologist. I should be able to do this, but here we go. I got it. Okay, so another way to think about collaboration is to consider the sort of intensity of the collaboration. So one way of describing this is to compare tightly coupled collaborations with loosely coupled collaborations. And with tightly coupled collaborations, there's a lot of uncertainty. So the team members are working together to figure things out. And an example of a tightly coupled approach to collaboration would be devising computational methods, for example. Then there are more loosely coupled collaborations where the work can be more divided up. It can be more modular. There's some coordination involved, but it's also something that people can do more autonomously. And I would say that applying existing standards would be part of a more loosely coupled approach. So let's first take a look at what's involved in building digital resources. One of the early examples of a digital archive is the Blake Archive, which got started in the mid-1990s. And if you look at the credits page, it's striking how many people were involved in this project and the different kinds of roles that they embodied. So it actually took 4 screen captures to list all the participants. Nearly 100 people have been involved in this project since 1995. And that includes the editors who were at different institutions. It included the project managers and people like Matt Kirschenbaum, a noted digital humanities scholar, were involved in this project. It involves research assistants, people who did the scanning, people who helped with metadata, and so forth. And this was a project that also involved figuring out how to coordinate these collaborations across distances. So one thing that the PIs and the project manager figured out is they needed to have some face-to-face interaction. So every year they would come together for Blake Camp to kind of work through issues and figure out where to go next. And as you could see by looking at the kind of list of different roles fulfilled in the project, there are a lot of different kinds of skills needed for projects involving developing digital collections and resources. So of course you need scholarly knowledge. You need knowledge of how to subscribe to editorial practices. You need to know how to mark up text. You need to know how to program. You need to know how to design, how to manage projects, how to collaborate, how to create metadata. And it's hard to think of one person who could do all that. So you need a team. One of my favorite examples of a collaborative project that involved developing a kind of key resource tool is the Orlando project. And this is a project that emphasizes collaboration in its very tagline, an ongoing collaborative experiment in the use of computers to engage in women's literary history. So the Orlando project built a sort of tool to look at the history of women's writing in Great Britain. And as part of this project, the editors wanted to sort of encode the relationships among authors, to encode the intertextuality among text. So they actually devised their own markup standard to be able to represent their vision of women's literary history. And you can see here that, for example, in encoding authorship, they include a way to mark up collaborations. And they were able to sort of leverage the markup to allow the reader to explore these connections among people and text. Now, it's worth noting that developing this markup standard required a team of editors and technical experts to work for several years in kind of figuring out how to represent knowledge. So this is intensive scholarly work, and it takes real resources to pull it off. But this is a project that has been pointed to as an example of the possibilities of collaboration in the humanities. Andrea Lunsford, who was one of the candidates for the MLA presidency in 2000, collaborates with Lisa Eade in studying collaboration. And they talk about the Orlando project as exemplifying collaboration because it involved, I think, nearly 100 people. That it had really ambitious goals, so the text base amounts to millions of words, and they wanted to sort of represent multiple ways of looking at women's history. So you can see several different approaches to collaboration at work here. One is a sort of tightly coupled approach as the editors and technical contributors figured out how are we going to encode these texts. Also, more loosely coupled approaches as a team of students helped to write the entries about the authors and to do the basic tagging and encoding. And it's important to note, by the way, that a lot of these projects provide real training grounds for students to develop core skills. And one of the contributions they make is well-trained digital humanists. And this is a project that's also participatory in allowing readers to have these innovative interfaces for exploring connections. And the reader can also view the encoded documents, so see how the scholars represented the knowledge that they are sharing. So picking up on this point about the importance of student work in digital humanities, I think it's important to note how collaboration is part of the pedagogy around digital humanities. And one project that exemplifies that approach is the Homer multitext, which brings students in to assist with the process of transcribing images of Homeric manuscripts, of encoding those manuscripts, of describing some of the textual features, and connecting the page images with the transcriptions. And students who participated in this project talk about the deep satisfaction of contributing to something larger, of contributing to public knowledge. And likewise, the faculty members talk about the real pleasure of being able to work closely with their students, to work with them in building knowledge. So now I want to move on to talking about the importance of transdisciplinary work in devising new computational methods. And one of my favorite examples here comes from an article, actually a couple articles, that Brad Pasanek, who's a literary historian, and Dee Scully wrote. Now, Pasanek was studying the history of metaphor, and he assembled by hand a database that amounts to about 8,000 examples of metaphor. He ran into his childhood friend, Dee Scully, at a wedding, and Scully happens to be a computer scientist now working at Google. So when Pasanek told Scully what he was working on, Scully said, "You are crazy to be doing this by hand. There's gotta be a better way." So they worked together to try to figure out if they could train a computer to detect metaphor. And when you look at the article they produced together, there are clear signs of this interdisciplinary conversation. So, for example, on the bibliography, a core humanistic text like Truth and Method coexist with machine learning, a computer science text. You don't typically see algorithms in works in the humanities. I mean, humanists recoil from algorithms often, but here they are in this article. But you also see literary language, the language of literary criticism, as Pasanek and Scully reflect on ways to automate the drudgery that is a part of scholarship, of finding patterns and examples. But they also worry about unleashing Frankenstein's monster as part of this process. They also reflect on what they note as a sort of productive defamiliarization that takes place when a literary scholar is confronted not with a poem or a novel, but by a word list. So this is a list of terms frequently associated with Shakespeare's metaphors of the heart, mind, soul, and body. So Pasanek says, initially this is just a different way of looking at literature, but then he can begin to make observations, for example, about the significance of fire imagery in metaphors of the heart. So what difference does collaboration make in this case, in other cases where people from different disciplines work together to define new methods? I think one benefit is just being able to learn about the practices of another discipline and think about new ways of approaching a problem. Also, in the process of this collaboration, you have to talk about your own assumptions and own approaches and explain those to your collaborator. So this forces a kind of critical self-consciousness about your own method. And it also, I think, is an example of what Kathy Davidson talks about as collaboration by difference. So she suggests that real benefits result from bringing together people with different perspectives. If you have people who think the same way, groupthink results. But if you have people who come in with different perspectives, you're more likely to solve tough problems and have more creative approaches to different disciplinary questions. So finally, I want to talk about the participatory humanities. So we can think of this as leveraging network technologies to extend the work of public humanities, to both reach out to the community to share humanistic scholarship, but also, as Kathy Davidson suggests, to reach in and bring in the ideas and contributions of the public. So one example of participatory humanities is HyperCities, which provides a platform that enables both scholars and the public to document experiences of space and time. So, for example, HyperCities worked with a community youth group in Los Angeles to enable young people to create these kind of spatial, temporal narratives of Filipino town in Los Angeles. So they conducted oral history interviews and kind of explored this area, and were able to embed video in the markers that are located in different places in this area. They could include images, text, other forms of media. And this perspective on Los Angeles coexists with other perspectives, including a work by a scholar, Phil Effington, exploring the history of Los Angeles. Todd Pressner, who is the PI of this project, talks about HyperCities as being kind of like a city in its diversity of perspectives. Another project that embodies the sort of participatory approach to the humanities is Transcribe Bentham. So this is a project that was grappling with a real problem. So there are about 60,000 manuscript pages produced by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. And it had been really slow going to get these pages transcribed. So University College London decided to make available images of these manuscript pages and invited the public to help with this transcription process. And they made available a kind of wiki-like tool that people could use in doing the transcription. So they have now had over 5,000 pages transcribed by the public. Most of that work done by so-called super transcribers, so people who just got so into this work. And whether they were driven by an interest in Bentham or an interest in working with manuscript materials or kind of a commitment to sharing their labor, it has been productive in engaging the public in contributing to the scholarship. And people have made discoveries along the way, for example, about Bentham's attitudes towards animal welfare. This project has also won several awards for exemplifying a way of promoting so-called citizen humanities. And there are a range of other examples of these kinds of participatory approaches, including projects in which scholars work with local citizens to kind of document their experiences. Crowdsourcing projects like Transcribe Bentham. So for example, the papers of the War Department project uses a tool developed by the Center for History and New Media, also the developer of Omeka and Zotero, called Scripto, that allows people to do transcriptions. There are participatory networks where you can kind of engage in ongoing conversations, like Haystack. And then there are open review processes where scholars and the public can contribute to the review of scholarly works in progress. And Media Commons is one platform where you see that kind of work taking place. So I want to stop here and see if there are any questions or observations. And also take a chug of water. Okay, well, let me move then into talking about some of the challenges that are involved in collaborative projects, and also suggest some strategies for addressing them. So collaboration isn't always, skipping merrily hand in hand. There are rapids to navigate, as it were. So among these challenges are, first of all, finding access to the tools, the resources, the money, and the people that it takes to pull off these projects, and finding people who have those core skills that are needed to do digital scholarship, the programming skills, the metadata skills, and so forth. As with any collaborative project, having a successful project in digital humanities requires managing these projects successfully. So Brian gave us some great strategies yesterday for project management in terms of setting goals, establishing timelines, establishing areas of responsibility, and also having clear ways of communicating. And sometimes that does require face-to-face conversations. Also, you have to have ways of handling the inevitable disputes that come up, and some projects have been derailed by personality disputes. Another requirement is just time. So Brad Pasanek talked about how important it was for him to come together with his collaborator, Dee Scully, and work together, figure things out together. And that was difficult since they were at different institutions. So there are a range of approaches to supporting digital scholarship. And CenterNet is actually a network of digital humanities centers. Some of these centers may be located in libraries. Some of them may be located in academic departments. Some may involve collaborations between academic departments and libraries. Some may be based in humanities centers. But there is an ongoing effort to connect these different centers and also to share resources. So CenterNet just released a set of resources on starting up your own digital humanities center. And Lynn Siemens, who I mentioned as being an important researcher on collaboration in digital humanities, has been part of that effort. And there are other models as well. So we heard yesterday from the Ohio 5 project, a collaboration among 5 liberal arts colleges. I would also point to the TRICO Digital Humanities Initiative, which involves Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, and Haverford. So TRICO Digital Humanities has been hosting programs around digital scholarship, provides funding for training and projects, and helps to coordinate the common activities in digital humanities among these 3 colleges. Another intriguing model is the research network. And INKE, which is based in Canada, is I think, a compelling example of a research network. This is a project that is investigating the future of the book by looking at the past, the history of the book. So it's exploring interface design, prototyping new approaches to reading, and textual studies. And it involves a team of over 30 researchers working at, I think, like 20 different institutions. I think there are over 50 graduate students who are involved in this work. So it's collaboration on a large scale across multiple institutions. I mentioned Lynn Siemens just a minute ago, and she's one of the people who's involved in this project, both studying how this collaboration is working and also coming up with kind of governance models and ways to make this collaboration work effectively. Because it's one that involves millions of dollars and multiple participants. There are also significant cultural challenges to collaboration, and these came up earlier. For example, for humanists who are used to working alone, it can be a little jarring to have to work with other people and participate in a sort of give and take. I think the trade-off is worth it. You can learn a lot from the process. You can expand your own perspective, but you do have to sacrifice a bit of control in order to make a collaboration work. Another issue, particularly for these interdisciplinary projects, is finding places to publish works that don't really fit into any existing disciplinary bend. And this is something that Brad Pasanek mentioned, that his work with D. Scully was too computational for a humanities journal, but too literary for a computer science journal. So they ended up submitting to a journal that sort of is the crossroads of the two, literary and linguistic computing. Another challenge that Brian mentioned yesterday is getting credit for collaborative work. I noted earlier that English departments, for example, don't really have a way of thinking about collaborative work, although there are ongoing efforts to devise standards for digital scholarship that account for collaboration. So just to point to a few ways of dealing with this issue, again, I think there is important work for disciplinary organizations and digital scholarship groups to play, as well as publishers, in coming up with ways to evaluate and recognize digital scholarship. So there are efforts underway at the MLA, at NINES, and other groups to develop these standards. Also, it's important to understand what each contributor needs in order to collaborate. So, for example, if you're working with a computer scientist, you can't just expect that they're going to, build you a tool. They need to approach a research problem of their own and come up with publishable work as a result of the collaboration. And it's also important to recognize the contribution made by each participant in the project, including the developers, the metadata experts, and so forth. So just to point to a few attempts to address these issues, yesterday Brian mentioned the MLA's new guidelines for information technology access and support. The MLA Information Technology Committee also came out with new guidelines for authors of digital resources, and among those guidelines are the importance of giving credit to every contributor to a project. Not only the researchers, but also the developers, the designers, and so forth. And I think a great model for how to really document the contributions made by each person involved in a project comes from the University of Virginia's Scholars Lab. So, for example, they have developed a really great plugin for a Mecca called Neatline that enables researchers to develop their own sort of interpretive maps drawing from digital collections. And part of the sort of documentation of Neatline includes a nice narrative about how this project has unfolded through different stages, and a way of acknowledging the contributions made by each team member as part of this process. So I think this gives you a real glimpse into how digital scholarship works, and also a nice model for acknowledging the contribution made by each participant in the project. Now, when I talked about participatory humanities, some alarm bells may have gone off, like, well, how do you know this is valid scholarship, for example? And it's worth acknowledging that there are some significant challenges to participatory scholarship. One is just getting people to participate. So I've seen, a fair number of these kinds of projects languish because people don't have the time or inclination to contribute. So it's important, I think, to have someone actively soliciting involvement. So Transcribe Bentham had people who were really trying to get people to participate and helping to coordinate that participation. You also want to remove barriers to participation and make it pretty straightforward to make a contribution. I think it's also important to acknowledge and reward participation. And that can be through recognition, although I think we're still figuring out how to recognize contributions to these participatory projects in a way that's recognized by tenure committees, for example. You have to give them opportunities for intellectual growth and for a feeling that you're contributing to something. And also you need to find ways of validating the knowledge, or at least acknowledging the status of the knowledge. How is this work being certified? How is it being reviewed? But on the whole, I think it's worth emphasizing the real benefits of collaboration. And I was struck by a comment that Matt Jockers made about the real joy he took in collaboration because he was able to learn a new way of thinking. He talked about collaborating with a statistician on an authorship study as amounting to a seminar in statistics. And also the pleasure of working with someone who sees the world in a different way and having your own view of the world expanded as a result. So just to reiterate, I think some of the core benefits of collaboration: you can do more, you can learn more, and you can really take pleasure in the process. So I'm happy to take questions or observations or stories of failed collaborations. And also, I will be posting these slides to my blog, and I'm a kind of a compulsive bookmarker, so I've got a lot of resources collected on collaboration as well. So questions? Thank you. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. So bring them on.
Yeah. One of the questions I have, you were talking about collaboration with the public, and that's sort of an interesting area for collaboration. What would be some of the ways you would see that being successful? Because I feel like in a lot of ways that could just fall flat when you're sort of going to the public and asking for help. You know, what are some strategies for success in engaging with the public to get them involved?
Well, first of all, I think you need to have a defined task. So with the Transcribe Bentham project, here are a set of resources that we need help with. And I think you also have to appeal to what's, I mean, as Brian said, what's in it for me. You know, to recognize their contributions. And, you know, different citizen science or citizen humanities projects have ways of recognizing that. I mean, so it could be something like a badge or some sort of public recognition. I think you also have to appeal to their own curiosity. So there's a citizen science project called eBirds that has been very successful in getting birders to contribute information about, you know, where they cite different species. And this has been important to scientists in studying, you know, bird migration and other scientific ideas. And the way they did that is, you know, just by helping birders do what they were already doing and providing an easy way for them to record their observations. So if you can somehow capitalize on what people are already doing or already interested in, I think that can be powerful as well. If you can add a sort of game-like element to that. So you can think about how you could approach this difficult challenge of identifying artworks by like providing metadata to describe those artworks by adding a sort of game element to that. So I think we have to be creative in thinking about how to engage the public. But ultimately, I think this can serve the mission of the humanities and help us do more work more effectively. Yeah.
So I'm a scientist. I'm one of the few people, I think, in the room who recognize the Shannon formula you put up. And I'm, of course, also a serial collaborator as a scientist. And I have, I guess, two questions, and that is it true that if a humanist goes and collaborates with, say, a statistician, that there is really still problem getting credit for the humanities contribution of the humanist to that paper? And I guess since I think you're going to say yes, my question then is why?
That's a good question. So is it, just to repeat the question, is it really difficult for humanists to get credit for collaborative interdisciplinary work, and why? I mean, I think it does depend on the department, but in general, I would say yes, and that's in part because the departmental policies don't really recognize collaboration as being part of the process. And you know, in part that is, well, how did you divide up this work? Who did what? So I think...
But it would be obvious then, right? The humanists did not write the Shannon formula. The
you would think.
scientists did not. It would be obvious.
Could you write a script that would sort of parse that?
Yeah, I mean, so the sciences have figured this out already. So there are conventions for acknowledging in different disciplines, like who did the most work on the project and so forth. And there are also ways of being really explicit about the contributions of each. But the humanities are still figuring that out, in part because collaboration is just kind of new and strange still. Yes?
I want to challenge the assumption that either digital humanities or collaboration in the humanities is new and strange.
Uh-huh.
I think this has actually been going on for decades, just not recognized as such.
Mm-hmm.
Faculty members in the humanities have spoken with each other at conferences and delivered papers before the paper was actually in published form for decades. They did collaborate, they did talk to each other, they did do peer review. All of these were, in many respects, collaborative activities. And many of these people have been using, even the person who had, Hasnick, making 8,000 metaphors before he realized there was an easier way.
Mm-hmm.
There may have been an easier way, but he was already doing digital humanities before he got to find out that there was an easier way. And I think one of the translations we need to do is help people realize this is not new and strange. How do you translate what you're already doing into something that can now be understood to be different in the tenure promotion process?
I think that's a really good point, and I would agree that collaboration has been a part of humanities work for a long time. So that was sort of the example I opened with of collaborating with people in my dissertation group. But that's sort of a different form of collaboration than working intensely together to produce a common work. And that kind of collaboration, by the way, has been going on for a long time too. If you look at the credits pages for critical editions, for example, there are usually multiple people involved in producing those editions or in producing reference tools. But I mean, I think it is important to point to disciplinary traditions in making the case for collaborative digital scholarship. Yes?
Hi, I had one thing that I kind of perked up when we were talking about that collaboration between the humanist and who went to a wedding and talked to the statistician.
Uh-huh.
And there was this instant understanding that there was a lot of potential there for doing really powerful things with these algorithms and statistical methods. And it just struck me, we talk a lot about collaboration between people in different academic and scientific and humanities disciplines. But I started thinking about how, scientists and engineers collaborate all the time with private corporations and things like that. And I started thinking, well, if what we need are experts who on a daily basis mine data for trends in language or patterns in those kinds of things, can these groups or consortia in academia partner with, Google, partner with Cisco, partner with companies, and determine how they can both benefit from sharing each other's expertise? I would think a place like Google would be very interested in being involved with humanities scholarship and higher education. They have the money, they have the expertise, they have the infrastructure. So looking beyond necessarily the ivory tower or the higher education, just as our scientists and engineers have done, to see where they can find new perspectives and expertise and innovation. And I was just wanted to ask you, what do you think the potential for that is, or is it going on, and to what extent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point to pick up on, the roles that companies like Google and Microsoft are playing in digital humanities. And in fact, there already are some collaborative initiatives underway. A few years ago, Google funded a grant program for digital humanities scholarship. Representatives from Google have presented on Google Books at digital humanities conferences, and Google Books is a really important corpus for digital humanities work, and the Hathi Trust as sort of an extension of Google Books. Microsoft Research has a program officer, Donald Brinkman, devoted to digital humanities, and he's been really active in reaching out to digital humanists. And there have been some important tools developed by both Google and by Microsoft to enable digital scholarship. So I think there are those collaborations ongoing. It's certainly possible to expand those collaborations, but I think as you point out, there are real areas of common interest. Yeah.
I think in talking to faculty and administrators recently at our campus about the problem of evaluation for tenure and promotion, one of the problems seems to be that if you ask the administrators who sets the guidelines for tenure and promotion, they'll say, well, the departments do. If you ask the departments, they'll say, well, we get to set the guidelines, but then it goes up to the deans and the provost, and we don't have any control at that point. So one of the problems that we think we're seeing is that nobody feels like they own that process, or that it belongs, like they have a part of it, but somebody else will maybe countermand what they've already said. So this isn't a problem, or maybe it's a problem that collaboration can solve, but like how do we get around that barrier? And it's a real barrier because in the meantime everybody says, well, we won't change our policies because the other people won't let us do it.
And that's an interesting problem. So departments and deans have different approaches to digital scholarship. I mean, it strikes me that one approach is to just bring the two together in the conversation. And I know that NINES, for instance, has been trying to have conversations about evaluating digital scholarship that involve pretty senior people. And there have been workshops at the MLA, likewise, that really explore how to evaluate digital scholarship. So I think we need to have more of those conversations across departmental and administrative boundaries, and also have some clear standards that disciplinary organizations vouch for, that people can point to in common in evaluating digital scholarship. So ways of really recognizing that scholarship and having some models to point to that demonstrate the impact of that scholarship. Does that seem like a plausible approach? Or?
It might be. I would like to think it is. What I think happens is a lot of times the administrators are already on board because they're used to scientists. They're used to people in the institution doing this sort of work and saying like, yeah, we get this. I think my experience is I think the humanities programs are a little more nervous about it, but then they can use the administration as an excuse sometimes. And of course the administration uses the departments as an excuse as well. So I think there's this sort of, that's the problem. And Kathleen Fitzpatrick likes to talk about if you will go person to person in a department and ask them, well, are you okay with accepting this digital article in somebody's tenure packet? They'll say, well, I'm okay with it, but my colleagues will never accept it. And then, because you don't want to seem like the outlier that will vote in favor of this outlandish thing for tenure, everybody collectively votes against it because everyone thinks everybody else will vote against it. So there's this sort of moment in which we're dooming ourselves to sort of repeat what's happening. And so that, because at the end of the day, that's where I see is the real problem is we can't support the work until you can get a job, you can keep your job doing it.
Yeah, I think that is a core problem. And I mean, there are people that we can point to now and say, that person got tenure based on digital scholarship. Like when I was at the University of Virginia, John Unsworth was kind of a prime example of someone who got tenure based upon, his record in digital scholarship. And, he turned out pretty well. So, I mean, I think we have some good examples.
This idea that there's this presumption of conservatism from one space to another. The department says, oh, but the administrators they're so conservative, they'll never buy this. And then the administrators say, well, we buy it, but the departments are so conservative, I can't see how this would flow. It does strike me that the space, like the places where digital humanities centers have succeeded have been largely outside of fairly traditional departments. And I think that's what's interesting about the space of digital humanities, is that there's actually room to be brave. And it does strike me that if some universities could just sort of buck up and recognize the fact that conservatism is something of a myth, And just like there's been bravery in starting digital humanities centers, starting this sort of spirit of collaboration that if people could point to a little bit more mass effect, you know, like they're not just one person at George Mason who's gotten tenure based on, you know, some creative projects using digital tools, but there are people here, 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 and here. There's a whole cluster of people here who have just achieved tenure. I mean, it feels like we're about 2 to 3 years away from a kind of mass modeling of what it looks like to actually get tenured in the digital humanities. But my guess is, and my hope is, that those spaces are not the sort of traditional R1s and Ivies, but are actually places that could become models through, I don't know, being brave rather than you know, being traditionally thought of as the elite schools.
I think that's a good point. I mean, so some of the leading innovators in digital scholarship are George Mason University, University of Nebraska made a conscious decision. We're doing digital scholarship and have hired some fantastic people. Also, it puts me in mind of Kathleen Fitzpatrick's great line about the importance of doing the risky thing, especially for junior scholars, but you also want to make sure someone's got your back, you know, that there are people who can kind of translate the real benefits of your work to the larger scholarly community. So it looks like we're out of time, but I'd be happy to continue the conversation later.